Hi everyone, it's Justine and I'm guest designing for Altenew today, and we're going to learn how to create this masked floral cluster here. Now if you're like me and love Altenew and love all the cards and inspiration, but you kind of feel intimidated by the whole watercoloring thing or coloring in general, this is a perfect card where you can create a really elegant, beautiful card without needing any sort of major artistic talent of any kind. So that was kind of my goal, was to create an easy card that anybody can make, which is generally how I make my cards anyway on my YouTube channel. So I'm laying out all of the stamps that come with the striped floral stamp set from Altenew, and I'm laying them on top of masking paper. Masking paper is simply a paper that is sticky on the back with removable adhesive, so you can lay it down and mask off an area. And I'm going to show you how to do that if you've never heard of it before. So I'm going to stamp all of these stamps all at the same time. I've picked them up with a stamp press, and it really doesn't matter what color you use at this point, or even if they're stamped completely correctly. So I'm stamping them all down, and then I'm going to cut them all out individually, but I won't make you watch me do that since it might get a little bit boring. I stamped a couple of extra flowers here twice, just in case I might need them. I wasn't exactly sure how big I wanted my cluster to be until I actually started laying down the card, so I didn't want to have to go in and cut out extra things if I didn't need to. So once I've cut them all out, they all have removable adhesive on the back now, and I can get started doing my cluster. When you're making a cluster, the only thing you really need to keep in mind is what you want to be at the very front of the collage or the cluster that you're making. So in my case, it's going to be this flower, and it's going to be in the bottom right-hand corner. Whatever you want to be in the forefront or the front needs to go stamp first and be masked over. So you can see I just put my mask that I cut out over tops to protect my flower. Then you're going to want to lay out the images you want to come next in the background. So that's going to be your second layer, and I'm going to actually be able to stamp a couple of things at the same time because I'm using a stamp press. So I'm going to stamp these down, some of the leaves, and then I'm going to cover these with the masking paper as well. So now all those areas are protected, and you want to think to yourself again, what's going to be the next thing in my background? What do I want to show up next? What do I want not to be hidden? And that's what's going to be your next choice. In my opinion, if you're getting really just started with clusters and things like this, you might want to do what I'm doing, is kind of work your way out to the sides and start with something in the middle as a focus. It's a lot easier. So this time I actually knew that I wasn't going to make the cluster much bigger, so I did cover up the flower here at the bottom, but I didn't bother with those little flowers up at the top. I'm just going to be careful when I'm stamping not to stamp over top of them. I'm just putting in the finishing touches now and the things that are going to go in the very back of the background, if that makes sense. I'm still not sure if I'm finished building, so I covered those up anyway with masking paper just in case. That was pretty much when I decided to stop going with the cluster because I didn't want it to be too much. I just wanted to add this one little flower still here at the top. And then the fun part is actually taking off all of the masking paper and revealing your final cluster. My other tip I would give when you're doing this is to make sure you push down on the stamp fairly hard, because you want to make sure that the lines of the stamps go right up against the masked image. Also, when you're cutting your masking paper, I try to cut sort of in between the black outline, if that makes sense. Alright, so now that my cluster is finished, I just need to work on my sentiment. So I grabbed a piece of black cardstock, and I'm going to be using the Just For You stamp from another stamp set called Pen Rose. When I am embossing on black cardstock, it's really important for me to use an embossing bag so that none of the stray powder gets stuck on the page. And then I'm going to be stamping this using Versamark ink, and I'm going to add some white embossing powder. I'm using a fine embossing powder so it gets the sentiment and the details of the sentiment just right. In order to avoid any warping with my card when I heat emboss my sentiment, I tend to leave my heat gun on for about 30 seconds before I apply it to the paper. Then I just simply cut down my sentiment with a pair of scissors, and I added some 3D foam tape to the back of that to make it stick out. You could really put the sentiment in so many different places on a card like this where the details are focused mainly in the corner. You can stick it up at the top at the bottom. You can cover up some of your cluster, you can leave it in the white space. It's really just up to you. And usually I would put it here in the corner, but I decided to try something a little bit different and kind of put it off center in the card over top of the cluster. And I really like the way that that turned out. Now I just needed to mount this card panel here onto a card base. I wanted to go for a white on white look. So I grabbed a card base that measures 11 by 4¼ inches, and it's scored there at 5.5 to make a top folding card. And I'm just going to glue this down. I'm not using any sort of 3D tape or foam at this point because it always costs me extra for me to put it in the mail. So I decided to just use a single layer of glue on the back here, since I already have some pop-up of the sentiment itself. And I just made sure that there was a nice white frame around it, and I think that gives it a really nice finishing touch. You could also color in a couple of the flowers if you'd like to give it a pop of color, or add some colored sequins. So I hope my video tutorial inspired you to create a cluster of your own, and I would love to see what you create. Thanks so much for watching!